On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors with the results of the draft lottery in, we can now take stock of the Jakob Poeltl trade in full. Was it a good trade? A bad trade? The most damaging trade the Raptors have ever made? We'll get into all that on today's show with Vivek Jacob. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, May the 13th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and of course, you can join our little listener family over on Discord. The link for our Discord server is in the description of the podcast. It is free to join, as always, and we'd love to see you there. It's a great little community we got building around the show. Talking draft, talking lottery results, talking playoffs, talking food, talking rap beefs. It's all going on in there. Would love to see you become part of our community over on the Discord. Of course, you can find the show for free on your favorite podcast app of choice on the audio side of things. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate it when you support the show there. And of course, you can go to YouTube as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell so you can be an everydayer and never miss an episode as it premieres or go lives, jump in or goes live. My goodness, I'm messing up my words today. But either way, go to the YouTube. It's much appreciated when you support there as well. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. Use the code all lowercase LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And we get rolling here on your Monday edition of the show on the heels of Sunday's draft lottery. I did an episode about that yesterday. You can go check that out if you haven't yet. Here to break down in full the Jakob Poeltl trade, sort of reflect on it now that we have the full scope of what the Raptors actually gave up. We don't know the player that's going to the Spurs with the 8th overall pick, but we know the bare bones of the deal. And so we can reflect now on a deal that is, let's just say, a little contentious among Toronto Raptors fans. And here to help break down the cost of the deal, the downstream effects we've seen over the last year or so, and the long-term outlook for Jakob Poeltl on your Toronto Raptors is our pal from Raptors in 7, from Cricket Canada, and from Sportsnet, where he does great NBA coverage. It is Big V, Vivek Jacob. What's going on, pal?
Nothing much, man. Absolutely great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all our listeners' moms who listen, expectant mothers.
Loves the moms.
Spent Saturday going to a Craig David concert, who is like my all-time favorite R&B artist. So
hell yeah,
the vibes are just immaculate today, man.
And on top of that, the Raptors conveyed their pick, which I know is a thing that you really wanted them to do from many conversations with you on and off the podcast. High five, buddy. We got our way. We love getting our way, don't we? And so, let's dive in, shall we, to the Jakob Poeltl trade in full. I guess we can begin before we get into the sort of bigger downstream effects, the tie-ins to the Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby departures, and whether or not the connections there are actually as direct as maybe it's being sort of intimated by some detractors who are still not very happy about the Raptors losing their pick, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just get into the pure cost of the deal and the sort of deal on its own merits. Final tale of the tape. 8th overall in 2024, 2 second-round picks. Second-rounders are monopoly money. Who cares? And Khem Birch for 4+ seasons of Jakob Poeltl making, $20 million a year for the next 3 seasons. Of course, they're already 1+ seasons into the Poeltl 2.0 era. Of course, this was done at a time where the Raptors badly needed a center. It was clear to all, whether it was for the viability of the team during the 2022-23 season or for the long-term outlook with Scottie Barnes on the team. It seemed pretty clear they needed a center on this team. Jakob Poeltl, you can quibble about the fit, certainly, and I'm sure we'll talk about that here. But overall, Big V, now that we have the full scope of the deal, how do you feel about it as a value play, as an overall transaction for the Toronto Raptors? And if you'd like, grade it on a scale of the Kawhi trade to the Vince Carter trade. You, by all means, find where it slots in on that spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I think when instead of that scale, I'll probably just look at it from the Masai scale and the deals he's done. this
Fair.
would be in the bottom tier.
Sure.
Unless you put, the Pascal deal in an exclusively bottom tier.
Oh, I certainly
Which
do.
so that's fair too. So this would then be just above that. I think in a vacuum, it's not a bad deal when you just, list out what you listed in terms of Kem Birch, Saidi Sissoko, 8th pick in a not good draft, and a second round pick in 2025 for Jakob Poeltl. That doesn't look bad. I think when you go back to the moment of when the franchise was kind of in that, hey, are you all in on this core? Are you moving on? What is happening with this franchise? That's where, for me, when I initially saw the Jakob Poeltl deal happen the night before the trade deadline, I was like, okay, there's going to be a bunch of moves coming now to sort of make this work, because the theoretical fit of Pascal and Scottie and Yak and just not having anywhere near enough floor spacing, I felt like there had to be something else coming. And then when that ended up being the lone move, and then just sort of delaying the inevitable. And then you look at the way things have played out this year, where maybe they didn't want things to go as south as they did, because it seemed like, they wanted to believe that this core could do something. That's why they ran it back. Then it wasn't quite working out. Then you look at after the All-Star break, where maybe they wanted to come out and compete and looked like they were competing, and then Scottie gets injured, then things really fell flat. And so I think they sort of dug themselves into a hole. And then when you have these things that happen that are out of your control, you put yourself in this bad spot. Having made the trade, actually, you know what? Go ahead. I've gone out.
Yeah, no. For sure. No, that's fine. I think it's all yes, the context of the trade is 1000% the reason to not like it, right? It sort of put a lot of pressure on them. They gave themselves an incredibly difficult needle to thread by bringing in a pending UFA in Jakob Poeltl. By the way, I don't buy the whole, they could have just signed Yak with cap space in the summer. No, they didn't have cap space, and they had other free agents to deal with. And so I don't buy that as like a sort of a reason to detract from the trade. Like, trading for a guy's bird rights is the way you get players now. And so that's just kind of a quick side note. But overall, the context of it all, the difficulty of the needle they had to thread of keeping 3 pending UFAs, obviously it cost them Fred VanVleet one way or another, right? I think they could have made the Fred thing work if they wanted to, where there's a will, there's a way. And we'll get a little bit more into that and how it ties into the Siakam and all of that coming up. But certainly the context of the deal, the offseason it set up, where they basically had to get it perfect to really make things work. It was just too much, and they clearly did not make it perfect. They did not nail the offseason. It was a pretty bad offseason by their standards, maybe one of their worst, and they paid the price for it. That said, having Jakob Poeltl on the team is nice right now. I don't know, man. He's a good player. They were 3-30 or some crazy number when he sat this season with injury. He's clearly important to what they want to do on the floor. He plays Darko ball. He fits with their new coach. And I can now start to make my peace with him being on the team. And we'll get into this in sort of his long-term outlook. But I think there's a world in which this trade begins to look better and better as Jakob Poeltl plays more time with this team and this core kind of grows with one another. They have Poeltl, they have Barnes, they have Barrett, they have Quickley with some contract stuff to figure out this summer, which feels like a formality. They're going to have this group together for at least 3 seasons. They're going to be able to build on it and sort of have some continuity that they've not had in recent seasons. And I do think there's a world in which everyone kind of looks around in 2 years and says, okay, yeah, you get the 8th pick, but Jakob Poeltl's been pretty essential to the turnaround of this team, and you feel kind of all right about it. But yeah, the context of it and what's happened over the last year cannot be erased. And I understand the displeasure with the overall sort of decision-making here. But I kind of used this analogy yesterday, Big V. I do feel it's kind of like day one post-declaring bankruptcy for the Raptors, where it's a lot of bad stuff led them to this place, but they have now declared bankruptcy. There are no more outstanding debts. They are clear. They have a runway in front of them. They have all their picks. They have all their guys under contract. And there's actually reason to feel pretty good about turning the page and acknowledging that the previous pages were bad and lots of things went wrong. But like, there's nothing you can do about that now. That toothpaste is out of the tube, and what lies ahead actually feels like it's got lots of reasons for optimism, including Jakob Poeltl's fit into the whole picture. So that's kind of my full 10,000 foot view of the deal. Did you have anything else you wanted to add there, Big V?
Well, I think the only thing I would add to that is, now that you have this pick, right, there is kind of that, hey, like, do we want to be really bad next year? Right. And you've got a team that's now, I think, wants to win at the very least. And so juggling that, I think, is going to be interesting next season. I think that's what's going to be interesting to see is, where do the priorities lie? And, those first 20 games will be interesting to see. And then obviously we know that, the organization can change course post-trade deadline if it wants to as well, right? And so I think those two bookends will be interesting to see next season in terms of, now knowing that you have this pick, knowing it's a good draft, how do you want to maybe orchestrate next season?
Certainly another potential cascading effect. And if they go and like try to outright tank next season, I will think very poorly of their decision making. Let's just get that out there. But the point I made yesterday on the show, kind of in thinking about this, is like, yeah, like they could take the route of, all right, let's just like get another high pick this year. But they don't have that clear sort of incentive to tank extremely hard that they would have if they still had a top 6 protected pick hanging out there, where it's like, oh God, we cannot give up the 7th or 8th pick to the Spurs this year. We simply have to go and make this happen, this year and get a high pick and be as bad as we possibly can. Let's get Portland bad and try to figure it out from there. So, there's still some book to be written for sure on the sort of cascading effects. I want to get into some of the other cascading effects of the Yak trade coming up here in just one second as well, Big B. But we'll do that in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the single best daily fantasy sports app you're ever going to find. More than 3 million people are playing on Prize Picks. You should too, because it's super simple. It's the way it should be. All you got to do is pick more or less on given stat projections on a given night and watch the winnings roll in. It's that simple. You can pick up to 6 players on an entry, but right now during the playoffs, it doesn't even need to be 6 players on your entry. You can pick 4 players on an entry, 4 stat projections, and if you get them all right, you can win up to 100 times your money. That is, I undersold it there. 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the NBA postseason. This applies for the NHL postseason as well. If you're a hockey fan, you can now to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and all on down the line. Of course, the WNBA season's kicking up this week as well. You can go play Prize Picks over there. All kinds of sports available for you to make your entries. You can do cross-sport entries, a really fun way to play daily fantasy sports if that's your thing. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Back at it here with Vivek Jacob from Sportsnet and Raptors in 7, taking stock of the Jakob Poeltl trade. Now that we know exactly what the Toronto Raptors have traded, at least in terms of draft capital, we'll see who ends up being drafted. And hey, maybe 10 years from now, we all say, the 8th overall pick who became a one-time all-star could have been a Raptor. Dang nabbit. Maybe we do that, but maybe not. And ultimately, God, we can't just keep on talking about this trade for the next 10 years, can we? Well, maybe try, but we can't keep doing it, please. I will go crazy. Downstream effects, Big V, sort of the cascading ripples after the Jakob Poeltl trade and kind of how it informed the Raptors team building. I do think this is an interesting ground to cover in evaluating the entire trade. Look, I think it's really easy to be like, well, they made this trade and thus they lost Fred and traded Siakam for nothing and had to move OG because of the Jakob Poeltl trade. Do you think that is a fair assessment at all of the Jakob Poeltl trade? I think I might have just teased how I feel about it, but curious, like, do you tie the follow-up sort of mistakes and bad things that befell the Raptors in their front office in the following year or plus after the Yock trade to the Yock trade? Or do you think they can kind of be evaluated on as separate entities of bad front officing?
I think the first starting point has to be Vision 6-9.
Yep.
And that experiment. And I'm okay with, post championship, post all the exits of that championship roster, wanting to try and do something different, thinking that's where the league was headed. In some ways, you can see they were right in having that vision, but it was pretty badly executed. You can look at other teams around the league that have simply done it better.
Sure.
and
It's also a damn difficult thing to execute. There's a finite number of 6'9" guys who do all of the things you need to do to play real basketball.
Well, I think that's just it, right? And it's like they just kind of were like, okay, are they 6'9" athletic? Sure, we'll figure everything else out.
Yeah.
And it's like,
who needs like ball handling skills?
Yeah, like maybe put the skill first in a league that is extremely skill first now. And I think that's where you, in terms of accelerating things, that's where it's like you reach this hard point of like you have to pivot away from this. And their reaction to it was to acquire the center. And Masai kind of came out in the press conference and was like, oh, I see it. Like everyone's saying, we need a big. Okay, we got a big. And it's like, no, man, like around this team, like everyone can see you need a spacing big.
Sure.
And
only so many of those guys, though, man. It's not that many.
Well, yeah. So you don't make a move for the sake of making a move.
Sure.
And so I think for me, that's where the problem arises for me. And that's where in acquiring the wrong type of big, that's when you push yourself into this window of, okay, this is no longer tenable. Now you got to change the spacing on the court completely and go in this different direction.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I do think there's an element of like that team just needed any big, and maybe you disagree and you think, oh, they should have just tanked that season and gone for Wemby, and fine, whatever. You can have that opinion if you want. I think as we've seen from the exploits of the Detroit Pistons, tanking is not all it's cracked up to be, and it is not always going to lead you to the promised land where you get all of the best players. It's a hard thing to get successful at, and it's basically pure dumb luck more than skill or strategy or anything like that. I'll get off my tanking soapbox for now. We'll save that for another day. But yeah, like I do think there's an element of just like any center was needed on the team, and having a center this past season of the ilk of Yock was like a valuable thing to have. Yeah, the fit was messy, and that is totally on the front office. But making a move for the sake of making a move. It's an interesting one because like I think they did need to make some kind of move to add a real big man to that team. Whether it just for the pure sort of baseline need of a Scottie Barnes team, like Scottie Barnes, you're trying to move him along, you're trying to grow him, you're trying to make him into a better player. It's easier to do that when you have a foundational backline rim protector type. And, foundational, I'm not saying he's like some sort of star. He's not a top 10 center beside Lyde there. That's for damn sure. But like having someone you can actually like build a real team with and like an actual sort of defensive backline, a spine to your basketball team, I think is valuable for the development of your, ascending 21, 22-year-old star. And so I do think there's value to the trade purely because of that, even if the fit was bad. I don't know if that like it might be just a non sequitur thought, but when it comes to like the Pascal thing, obviously the fit between Yock and Pascal, not amazing, right? It worked with the bench mob because they were fun, cool, bigs passing to each other. Obviously an entirely different team context when Yock came back. And that led to the sort of clunkiness of the Siakam, Barnes, Poeltl thing. But I do kind of refuse the notion that simply getting Poeltl forced them to trade Pascal. Where there's a will, there's a way. If they wanted to keep Pascal, you could have moved off of Poeltl. You could have found a way to figure that out. You had 18 months to figure out the money situation if you didn't want to move on from Pascal. They clearly just did. They telegraphed it from the summertime. They wanted to move on from Pascal. I don't think anything was really changing their mind based on what we've seen over the course of the last year or so. Do you buy into the notion that like the Poeltl thing like directly is the reason why they ended up being forced to move Pascal, and I guess by extension OG, although the OG trade I think had its own sort of undercurrent of this guy's leaving, we got to get something for him now. It was maybe kind of a different thing on its own.
Well, I think that's all part of like accelerating it, right? Like Vision
Right.
6-9 not working out, then getting a big that kind of sort of showed that, hey, only one of these players is going to work around him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
if theoretically you had a spacing big around Scottie and Pascal, there was a case for then having Pascal and Scottie together.
Mm-hmm.
And in having a good player, you had to, I think, get away from that idea of Pascal and Scottie together. And obviously, it makes much more sense to hang on to Scottie because he is that foundational centerpiece. He is the young guy. And so from that standpoint, there was logical sense. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you could also argue it made more sense once you had a guy like guys like Quickley and RJ on the team, and you could kind of see a fit there. And so that again brings you to the point where it's like, hey, did you have to go into this tank where, you could have ended up conveying the pick as you have,
Mm-hmm.
had a solid team,
Or been in that 10th slot where the
re-signed
Hawks were and jumped up in the lottery.
re-signed Pascal for the purpose of trading him down the line at higher value than, a guy who just had a few months remaining on his deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the part where it's like, okay, things kind of did get accelerated because it was exposed to be a bad fit.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Go ahead.
just not an optimal fit.
Yeah. Do you think they lost Fred because they traded for Yak? Like, do you think those two things are directly connected? Or is that just like the Rockets going nut and not accounting for that? And it's just like a misread of the market independent of Yak?
I think that is one where the Raptors clearly preferred the flexibility.
Sure.
Because when you think about it, the reality is Fred's third year is a team option,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that team option really mean, right? Like the Rockets can just decline it if they want to. And so if you wanted to, give him that extra money, I think there was just a natural divorce that was coming there. And I think he is one of those guys that, like Nick Nurse, you just look at and say, hey, they're where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. There is a take out there. Like, I'm working on it. And I'm sure someone will work on it over the next couple of years. Like, if things go really well here and like the Scottie Quickley duo pops, the team surprises next season and is kind of headed towards something interesting in the next couple of years. I do wonder if like the Scottie appreciators out there will be like, actually, the Yak trade was incredible because it put into motion the assembling of the Scottie-centric Raptors. Emmanuel Quickley is not a Raptor if they don't make the Jakob Poeltl trade, and all these downstream things take place. It's like that's going to be a take out there. I might be the one with the take, even though I wasn't necessarily like clear the way for Scottie only. He is the prized Prince boy, and no other players on the team should ever touch the ball kind of person. But maybe I'll have that pivot in a couple of years' time if things go well here, and look back at the Yak trade fondly as the thing that set it all in motion. And that's the thing, right? Like that could happen. Like that it is like that is a thing that could happen, and it'll make all of the sort of misgivings of the last couple seasons feel a lot less bad. I want to pick up that thread to close out the show. Big V, get into Yak's role in the team going forward. Does he have the capacity to make this trade feel better or worse over the next 3 seasons that he's under contract? We'll get into that question to close out the show. Just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sports book in North America. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. go check it out. Lots of stuff there on the FanDuel app for you to go peruse. It's super user-friendly if you want to go play there. I like to make little futures bets once in a while. I'm not much of a sports wagerer, but sometimes I will say, oh, yeah, hey, look at that. There's a team out there that I think might have a shot at winning a title or something like that, and throw a little scratch down on them. I've gotten lucky. Maybe it wasn't lucky. Maybe it was just direct skill when I picked the Nuggets to win last year's title at like 20-1 early on in the season. Maybe you can do the same. The WNBA season starting up. Maybe you want to go put some money down on Caitlin Clark doing the thing in year one and surprising the world with the Indiana Fever and pulling off the shock upset and winning the title. You can go and do that. Make a futures bet over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, back at it here, closing out the show. Just a reminder, Locked On Sports Today is your 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that has Locked On shows all the live long day. I think I'm on there. Maybe at the time we're recording this, I'm on there talking about the lottery and all that good stuff. Lots of good stuff rolling over there on the 24/7 channel, whether you're a basketball fan, a hockey fan, football, college sports, all day long. Just don't work. Put on the 24/7 channel and procrastinate all day long. I highly recommend it. All right, let's wrap things up here with a look at the future for Jakob Poeltl. Still got 3 more years under contract, about $20 million a year. A deal that I think is going to age pretty nicely as like low-end starter money goes, honestly. Like I think that's going to be a movable contract. That's going to be a deal you can throw into trades, a salary matching, et cetera, et cetera. And he's also a guy who offers a lot of value on the floor while obviously being an imperfect player. The free throws, the lack of shooting, etc. Just a lot of good that Jakob Poeltl brings to the table. And I think the team now, while maybe not perfectly set up around him, does fit his skill set a lot better than it did when he arrived just over a year ago. So Big V, I ask you, like, do you think there's a world in which this trade looks better, looks like a win with the play of Jakob Poeltl over the next few seasons? Like, what's the avenue for that? Or do you think that there's a chance that it can kind of get worse and we look less favorably upon this deal if the guy who gets picked at 8th starts to hit or whatever? Curious on your sort of thoughts of the future of this deal and how it might age. Of course, we're going to keep on talking about it forever and ever and ever until we're all on the ground.
The future can be good for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think when, for example, you just look at that starting lineup of Quickley, Gary Trent Jr., RJ, Scottie, and Yuck, that was a pretty effective starting lineup. And so
they slapped teams. It was awesome.
And so how can you better complement that starting 5 with a capable bench unit? Can you maybe have some big takeaways from that starting lineup in terms of informing those supplementary players? I think Masai has talked about getting a 3-and-D guy in. Masai has talked about having a backup point guard. And man, the way Andrew Nembhard is balling out right now for the Pacers, you would love to see.
You couldn't get one of the Pacers young guys? Just one? I'm going to get a tattoo of that. That's going on my gravestone. You couldn't get Jarris Walker?
And so that's where, I think just you get back into that vacuum mode and say, this is the team now. It's like, hey, how do you make this team as good as possible, as soon as possible? And the other path to it still being good is the Raptors still being good, but also maybe someone else seeing quite a bit of value in Yak, and you're able to better fit the roster with a good trade, right? And so I think those are the 2 avenues in which this could still come out looking pretty good. One maybe a bit more realistic than the other. The former idea of the team just being very good and that starting 5 being very good, and the majority of them being in the same age timeline. And I think those are the 2 paths.
Yeah, for sure. I think the idea, basically how I view Jakob Poeltl, I think right now, and I've made this comparison before, and they're very different players, obviously, but to me, he now is kind of the Jonas Valanciunas for this team, right? Where it's like, he's probably not the center when they get real serious, like whether that's more than 3 years from now and his contract's up, or eventually they trade him in a move to kind of upgrade or change the fit at that spot. I think that's also a fine thing to be. Like Jonas Valanciunas had a lot of good years here. There's nothing wrong with having a good starting level center soaking up 30 minutes a night for you. I do think, that they would be really well served finding a backup big for him just to insulate against losing him, because he's clearly very important to how they want to play. And they completely fell off a cliff whenever he wasn't available this past season. Of course, the back part of the season also because Scottie wasn't available. It's not all on Yak, but they were really, really bad when he didn't play this year. And I think he figures to be a nice sort of connective piece for this team on a team that needs connective pieces, right? I think we know the pillars are going to be Scottie and Quickley, and then filling in between those guys. That's going to be the challenge here for the front office. And you want to fill in between those guys with guys who have upside, obviously, and guys who could hit and kind of tap into some star potential to really carry the ceiling of the team higher. But you don't have to have that in a center all the time, right? You can have a perfectly fine low-end starting center and be a successful NBA team. I kind of think the Raptors have been smart about how they've handled this position sort of philosophically, maybe not in terms of the actual moves they've made, but I think their philosophy is, unless you have one of the guys at the position, having a guy at the position is fine. And I think, Jakob Poeltl is a guy at the position. He's not one of the Jokic Embiid tier, who is like a total game changer that's worth paying max money to. But I also think like they're not in the business of going and paying, $30 million to a starting center who doesn't do all of the stuff that a main central foundational core building block center will do for you. And I think that's the smart way to go. I think paying that kind of money for like DeAndre Ayton is a really surefire way to not have success on your team when it comes to the build long term. Sure, glad they never got it on the Ayton sweepstakes when that whole thing was going down. I think he's a perfectly passable starting center and can make this deal age pretty decently just by his play on the floor that we saw this year. We'll probably not talk about him as far as like a guy to improve upon a lot of stuff this summer in our series that we're going to keep on doing throughout the offseason here, because we kind of know what Yak is. But is there anything that does stand out to you that you'd like to see Yak do better, to fine tune, to hone as he, gears up to be the starting guy on this team going forward? Like, what's like the one sort of pie in the sky thing that if you could pick, Jakob Poeltl gets better at this summer, what would be the thing?
I mean, the thing I would love to see most is just it's a difficult path to it, and that is some kind of jumper, right?
Can you do 30-foot push shots? Is that a thing? I feel like train with Kyrie or something, or Luka, and they could figure that out.
Yeah, and so I think he's someone who's just like very good at what he does. Realistically, he's been working very hard at his free throws. Like, can you just at least be a capable free throw shooter? If you could get to 70%, that'd be pretty good.
Hell, even 60 like avoids the hacking conundrum, right? Like,
yeah. And so I think that's what I'd probably look at. I think with the paths to like, even a free throw jumper, like that should be the baseline of what an NBA level center, a productive offensive center is these days. And obviously he's very nimble around the basket, and he's a good finisher. So you really, really enjoy that aspect of his game. The way he operates in the pick and roll with Quickley has been really encouraging. And obviously his screen setting is huge. So I think there's very good aspects to his game right now as we speak. And the one thing, if I had to pick one thing for a guy who seems pretty, kind of set at where he is as a player and what he'll be in the years to come, it's give me some free throw shooting. Give me maybe just like a foul line jumper.
Yeah, I hear that. I think for me, I'd like to see this is not just a Yak thing. This is on the coaching staff as well. Kind of like a definition of what they want him to do on defense. Because I think it was kind of all over the place last year. He was at the level of the screen. He was switching. He was dropping. Like, I wouldn't mind just kind of having like a set core defensive principle they go by. And look, that after you master that, you can layer in more stuff and become a more sort of multiplicitous defense. But I do think off the top, like just finding, okay, he's a medium drop guy and we work around that, and he gets to kind of play in and get the reps playing that way as well. Maybe he's a deep drop guy, like whatever they figure out as sort of the main utility for him on defense. how he interacts with Scottie on the defensive end of the floor, with his help side rim protection being obviously a big tool they have in their bag. I think that's something I'd love to see. Again, it's not all on Yak. It's kind of a coaching staff thing, but that I think would be a pretty useful thing as they try to build this defense up from, rubble going into next season. We will leave it there. Big V, I feel like we've done a pretty good job talking about this trade reasonably. It can be done, everybody. It can be done. You have anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Usual stuff, man. NBA stuff still going at Sportsnet. Cricket stuff. Some of these features will be rolling out because the World Cup is coming in about 2.5 weeks, and so it's super exciting. And yeah, I will have a Raptors in 7 post up soon. Been juggling a lot lately, in a good way, and so yeah, that's kind of been on the back burner. But yeah, besides that, you can follow all the work that I'm doing on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Doing all that writing and also going to circus performer school. Very impressive stuff. Unbelievable. All that juggling. God. Why did they give me a microphone? We're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for hanging out. Sorry. We'll be back again tomorrow. Look, it's a weird week. I'm traveling this week, so I'm pre-recording all of the rest of the episodes for this week. Today, there'll be 4 more shows on top of the Sunday episode, and 3 more shows on top of Sunday and today for this week on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you have those to look forward to. We're going to talk about the WNBA with Chelsea Light. We're going to talk about the draft and some offseason possibilities with a Would You Rather episode with Katie Heindel. And I'm going to take a look at 3 prospects who I'm quite fascinated by at number 19, Jalen Tyson, Jameer Watkins, and Tyler Smith in an upcoming scouting episode as well. So you have that to look forward to throughout your week. In the meantime, thanks for following, subscribing, rating, reviewing, etc. We'll be back on Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. Another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. Ooh.